Welcome back, folks. So let us continue from where we had left off last time. There is the verses that are going to follow. They are going to need some technical background, but let us just go over this one verse, and then we will see the technical background that I was talking about. We were looking at this verse 44. भोगैश्वर्य प्रसक्तानां तया पहृत चेतसां व्यवसायात्मिका बुद्धि समाधौ न विधीयते. So the people or when the mind is clinging on to things of desire, of objects of desire, when it's clinging to that, it is distracted. Bhogaishwarya prasaktanam. Taya, bhoga is material enjoyment. Aishwarya is luxury. Prasaktanam, so those who are attached to that. Bhoga Aishwarya prasaktanam. Taya, by such things. Bhoga Aishwarya prasaktanam. Taya pavrita chetasam. So for a chetasam, so that these people who, when I say these people, it is in general people or a mind who is scattered. It is difficult. Vyavasayatmika. Vyavasayatmika is to focus, to concentrate. Vyavasayatmika buddhi, to concentrate. It is difficult for somebody whose mind is scattered to wholeheartedly focus one pointed, to give one pointed attention to the topic at hand. In this case, of course, we are talking about the Atman. The, there are different words that get used to describe this phenomenon. Vyavasayatmika buddhi, samadhau. Samadhi is the tranquil state of mind, and we are going to get somewhat into the details of this in the next 3 or 4 slides. So we will touch upon this topic of samadhi. This is the variation of that word. Samadhau na is not, we have seen that. Na vidhiyate. So this, the mind, a distracted mind is not able to concentrate, and therefore it is not able to achieve the goal that it has set to achieve. So this distraction is the cause of the downfall. We need to again compare this with we need to compare this with our metaphor, right? This is something that's going on, and we need to keep this parallel, the metaphor that is referring to the fact that Arjuna is in the battlefield, and it is his duty to fight the enemy in order to achieve the goal, which is the conquest of Hastinapur. He is the rightful, all Pandavas, they are the rightful owners, rulers of Hastinapur. And so that is the ultimate goal. And whoever stands in that goal, he might appear to be a good person, but there is no choice. And this obstruction has to be removed in order to reach this goal. So Arjuna, you do not get distracted by these other things. Like you might have a lot of devotion towards your guru, Dronacharya, or you might have attachment towards Bhishmacharya. These things should not form an obstruction for you when you have plunged into this battlefield. And this metaphor, this analogy, is when we as an aspirant, we set to meditate, to focus on something, and then these small distractions come up which appear to be significant or useful at that time, but from a long-term perspective, they are actually going to hurt you, and you need to gather strength to basically vanquish. Vanquish is a very big word, but subdue these small emotions. Well, I'm calling small, but they could be big as well. We should be able to subdue them and keep our eye on the pole star that we are after. These small, these things, these other things, I keep saying small, but these other things, we need to have, gather or cultivate or develop enough strength to vanquish it, subdue it. So now we have been saying that we are in this battle, so we have to reconnoiter this battlefield. When when a country, when a general is asked to fight a war for his country, and then he is told or comes to know who the enemy is, then what does he do? He needs to understand the enemy. He needs to understand its strength and weakness. He needs to understand his own strength and weaknesses. And then he needs to strategize, and where he needs to use more force and where he can afford to relax a bit. In fact, the point of controversy in Mahabharata as well as Ramayana is sometimes it might even seem to be okay to resort to apparent adharmic, unrighteous means in order to vanquish one of your foes. In the instance of Mahabharata, the when Dronacharya, in almost all the cases where Arjuna, after the fight starts, and Arjuna one by one takes down all these stalwarts, these big giant people, in almost all the cases, he has to resort to some of these apparent, I'm deliberately using the word apparent, unrighteous things. So for Bhishma, he stands in front of him Shikhandi, and this is not a session that is supposed to go into the details of the Mahabharata, but that is a somewhat unrighteous thing that gets done. And maybe you are able to justify this. But then let me just stop sharing for a minute. And then the other thing is Dronacharya, that was a white lie. They happened to kill the elephant whose name was the same as the son, Dronacharya's son's name, Ashwatthama. And Yudhishthir, who supposed to never speak a lie in his life, he spoke a white lie that Dronacharya, and then softly he's saying the elephant, not the person. Actually, I'm paraphrasing this. It's slightly different than what I'm saying. But the point is that it is okay sometimes in this battle to resort to unfair means, if that means you can collect your mind, free itself of distraction by whatever means, and keep an eye on this pole star and keep walking towards it. So the next few verses that we are going to see, as the next one, not so much, but the one after that is the most popular verse quoted from not just the Bhagwad Gita, but the entire Mahabharata. And sometimes you might say it is a verse that is probably almost some people find that when you talk about Hinduism, it kind of identifies Hinduism with that, which is kind of incorrect. But nevertheless, that's just because it just happens to be so popular. But for that verse, as well as the verse before that, prior to that, we are going to lay some foundation work. And we are going to have a 50,000 foot view of how the mind works from a Vedanta philosophy. And this is the result of the most remarkable and brilliant work of Shankara. His commentary or paper that is there that prefaces the Brahma Sutra, his work on the Anyonyadhyasa, it's called. His commentary on this Adhyasa Bhashya is a gem of a thing that is almost it should receive several Nobel Prize. That's the weight. If some measure of comparison needs to be done. Now we are just going to scratch a mere surface of it, just enough for us to be able to appreciate the words, the most popular and to a certain degree most complicated words that comes in the Bhagavad Gita. So we are going to digress from our flow of the verses just for this session, and depending on how it goes, even for the next session, before we jump back, and then it will be easy to understand this verse karmanya adhikaraste, that verse, because without this background it's easy to dismiss it as something superficial, and uh, it's they're obviously subjective. Different people interpret it in different ways. There's so many ways it can be interpreted, but we are taking a very Advaitic standpoint. So it begs to, or it behooves us to therefore understand some of the fundamentals of this Advaita philosophy. So let me share the screen again and then move to the next slide because we are not going to see this words. So this thing, the mind and consciousness, these are these words, the word consciousness especially is something that is the English equivalent of the word Sajjidananda or Chit Shakti. There are a couple of Sanskrit words, and this kind of comes closest to it, but really speaking, it is very inadequate. It doesn't, there is no other good word in English to reflect some of these words that are there in Sanskrit. So we are going to stick with this word consciousness. And then we want to understand, this is a Vedantic standpoint, how the mind works, what the mind is, what the vrittis are. Again, vritti, there isn't a good word in English for that. We can roughly translate it to waves or ripples on the surface of some kind of medium. So consciousness is the awareness that we have about anything. So we are able to see something, vision. So the fact that we are aware of an object, it means that consciousness is present. Without consciousness, we will not be able to become aware of anything. So this kind of forms a test. If you, if we become aware of something, then that something is not that which has become aware. So this is a slightly difficult concept to digest, but a very important one, very crucial one, critical one. That that which is trying to understand, subject and object basically, that which is trying to understand and that which is understood are two different things. So everything that we experience, we are aware of it. The minute we say that we are aware of something, then it translates to, or it implies that we are not that. Because if we become aware of uh, an external entity, then we are not that entity. There is a difference between what one comes to know and who knows. Two different things. The entire 13th chapter of the Bhagwad Gita is devoted to this particular topic, Kshetra, Kshetrajna. Also, there are several texts that deal specifically with this topic, go into an excruciating level of detail. There is a Drishya Vivek. There is another very popular text that goes over this. So the way this is understood from a Vedantic standpoint, and especially from how Shankara has so brilliantly explained. Again, Shankara is not inventing new things. These concepts are there all over the Upanishads, the Vedas. They are there. But if you are an individual, an average person tries to go through all the Vedas and Upanishads, we will never be able to do what a Shankara can do. He's a class apart. He's like a 100 Einsteins put together. That kind of a he's his ability to see things a certain way is just unparalleled. You and me, we see a ball and it appears red to us, a red ball, and to you also it appears red. If you talk to Einstein, he would tell you that it is or if you drop a ball, let's say if you drop a ball, then he would tell you that it is the space-time continuum and so on and so forth. His view of thing. If you ask Newton, he will the same thing. He will explain in a different way. And if you ask Shankara, he has got his own view, a very different view. Okay. So what happens is that there is this hard line between consciousness and everything else. That is point number one to grasp. This is a very important point to be aware of. This distinction, this consciousness and everything else. So are you aware of your thoughts? Are you aware of your mind? Now that is a slightly loaded question when I say aware of the mind. So let's not get there. Are you aware of your thoughts? And yes, we are aware. So the minute I say that you are aware of your thoughts, then that means that consciousness and thought are two separate things, right? So these thoughts that are there, these thoughts, how do they look like? What is their life cycle? What is the nature of their existence? Where do they live? What are they made up of? What is it that comprises a thought? What kind of changes does a thought undergo? There are several such things that you can think about. And that's why I said that we will be scratching the surface and not getting into the nitty-gritty details of this. And this can now go on and on and on. There's tons and tons of study that has been done on this. So at a very basic level, this can be compared, consciousness can be compared to a water placed in a beaker. Just to keep it simple, actually, most of the time you will see the scriptures or the text comparing it to the ocean, which is a very huge thing, and that's deliberate, just to imply its nature of infiniteness. That is why they compare. But we will keep it simple. Let's say that there is a beaker. So this blue thing that is there, this is where there is water in this. So this is the water of consciousness, if I can call it that. Obviously, this is a very rough illustration. It is an abridged and adapted illustration because this consciousness cannot have a border. But for the moment, keep it up aside. So we have got this water in this beaker. And I guess this picture could have been drawn a little bit better, but you can imagine that there are waves that when you shake the beaker, there are waves on top of this beaker, right? So that is what is being shown over here. So each wave is a experience, and this experience is also thought. So thought can be or is a predominant component of an experience that we go through, that we undergo. So here are 4 waves that are there, which means 4 different experiences are there. And typically the tip of this is where the wave is, but I'm deliberately using the concave surface because I want to show what goes inside. So there are ripples that are there on the surface of this consciousness, these ripples that are there. So you have got a pond, or you have got this beaker, and you drop a pebble in it, and then you see that there are waves that come, and these waves, the waves will glide and go on for a while. Some of them, they are small waves, and they will exist for a few seconds and then go back to the state of being calm or not moved, unperturbed. Others might, in this case, it might go and hit the wall of this beaker and come back. Now, if you throw 2 pebbles, which is an event, you can say throwing of a pebble is an event. If you throw 2 pebbles, then there are 2 waves that come. And then these 2 waves, they can interact with each other and form yet another different kind of pattern. And one can imagine the complexity of waves when you are constantly chucking pebbles into this beaker over here, virtually to the point of chaos. If you keep chucking pebbles into this all the time, then these waves, they keep churning the water over here. So these waves that arise and live and die, succumb on, well, succumb is not the word, they kind of vanish back into consciousness. These waves, they are called as ruttis. Rutti is this wave that has arisen, has become alive on the surface of consciousness. And these collections of waves, which is this red dotted square, that rectangle that you see, this collection of vrittis is what is called as the mind. So the mind is a constant influx and outflux of thoughts. That is what is the mind. Now, before we move to the next topic, the point, one important point that we want to be aware of is that this consciousness, what is its nature? In Sanskrit, there are several words, and they are translated to a certain degree into English. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat is truth. Sat, Chit, conscious, existence, knowledge, bliss, Ananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. That is how Satchidananda translates. Now, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a definition of Brahman, which is considered as one of the founding or one of the fundamental definitions of Brahman, and it gets used extensively and discussed in several of the Hindu texts, which is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That is how Taittiriya Upanishad. Each of these words, there have been several books written on this, and one can go and talk about this for hours together. Obviously, we are not going to be doing that, but the consciousness is not to be taken lightly. Its nature is that of being unperturbed, blissful, peaceful, the kind of things that are impossible for the mind to comprehend or experience. That is the kind of nature that consciousness has. And what Vedanta claims is that this to get to the status of this consciousness, pure consciousness, unsullied consciousness, that is what we should aim for. That is the aim of life. Everything else is a means to an end. So this is the most important message that Advaita Vedanta gives. You have to keep everything else as secondary to this goal. And this consciousness, Satchidananda, this existence, knowledge, bliss, the fact of the matter is that by, and we don't have time to get into this, by its very nature, by the very definition of what it is indestructible. It cannot be destroyed. And what happens is that if you have a wooden peg, a small wooden square, and you paint it blue, and then you take off that paint and you paint it red, and you, or on one side you paint it red and the other side you paint some other color, and you do all these kind of variations to that, but at the core it happens to be this main block of wood. You can take it and make some other form out of it if you want, but it happens to be this wood. So if, let's say, you make a chair out of it, and the chair begins to feel that it has got its own existence, which is kind of true. The chair has its own existence, but it is, after all, just name and form. It is, we cannot say that the chair is not wood. The chair is wood. When we see a chair, we call it a chair, and we don't even think twice to say that it is a chair. Remember, not wood. We don't say that because it's a given. It's a given. Now, if the chair, this is what I am explaining, is some of the core Vedantic principles, and we don't have time to get into the details, but I'm quickly going through all these things. So this chair, if for whatever reason it begins to think that I am this chair, but I'm not this wood, it begins to get this wrong notion that Vedanta claims is the root of the problem of human suffering, right? In short, that is the problem. So if we take that analogy and we apply it here, this consciousness, if you look at these waves that are here, what are these waves made up of? What material is it that is used in the formation of these waves? It is consciousness, and they arise in consciousness and they subside into consciousness. They dissolve, they go back into consciousness. And these vrittis, these different vrittis, they all make up the mind. And so if the collection of these vrittis is what is the mind, that too is consciousness. Now, if the chair is going to say that I am me, I am this chair, not this word, that is what the mind is saying over here, that I am me, I'm not this consciousness. And this Vedanta claims is the ignorance. That is the word that you might see being uttered in several of the texts, ajnana. This ajnana. And the entire system of Vedanta is built around the fact that how this ajnana has come to be and what are the means to get rid of this ignorance, this ajnana. That is all that is there in Vedanta. To find a means to eradicate, to address this ignorance. So when this ignorance is addressed, what is going to happen? Then the mind finds that it is not something different from consciousness. It is consciousness itself. Then the whole perspective of an individual to look at the world, it changes so dramatically and drastically that he becomes unaffected by anything that these vrittis can throw at him. Okay, I know this is I'm going pretty fast from this topic, but we, in the interest of time, we'll have to do this. So, given this fact that these waves, they ride on top of consciousness, how does the mind work? So we are going to look at that in our next slide. Okay. So now if I see a blue football sitting on a table and somebody else sees it. So this ball, it sits out there in the physical world, so-called physical world. Because, at some point, if you really begin to analyze all this, you will get to a point when you begin to question some of the very basic postulates or very basic constructs of reality. And it at that point, you begin to have some very fundamental doubts about reality. Let's not get there yet. We might get to that point sometime later. But there is this ball, this football, a blue ball that is sitting on this table that I am seeing and somebody else is seeing. And the light hits this ball from the sun or from a tube light and it gets into the eye. And something wonderful happens, and this gets converted into some stimuli and into voltage and some frequency, and it goes to the neuron, and we kind of know what happens. It goes to the our center in the brain of vision, and then something happens over there and cognition takes place. This ball that we see gets formed. Where does this ball get formed? That is what is shown in this picture. It is a wave, a vritti that gets created in the mind as a mental object. And given the background that we had from our previous discussion, what is this ball that is now created inside of our mind? What is this ball created of? The ball sitting there outside on the desk or the table is made up of leather or some rubber, some material. But the ball that is here inside the mind, this ball is created of vrittis, which are created of consciousness. So this ball, it generates a vritti. So now you have a beaker in which there is water, and you are agitating the water by throwing these pebbles in. Once this agitation starts, you slowly become unable to see the clear water beneath. The more waves that come, the more we see this agitated surface and the less we see the water. That actually the, the wave is nothing but water. But the more waves that are, the less water we see and the more wave we see. And although it is the same as water, we don't see it like that. So now in this case, I see a dog and that creates an impression. And I see a cat and I see a tree. And all these are objects that are born as vrittis in my consciousness. And so they form their own pattern and they begin to interact with each other, some very mildly, others very strongly. You see the red ball, you are reminded of a hibiscus flower that is put in front of a deity that you worship, and that takes you to the priest who had put on it. And then the priest had come in the morning and he was wearing this and he rang a bell, and things just keep getting connected one after all. These vrittis, they start playing their own havoc, not because of some deliberate thing. It's just the nature of these vrittis. They come, they interact, patterns form. So now this tangible, so-called tangible, because tangibility itself becomes questionable after a while. And we very seriously don't have time to get into all that. But this external object that we interact with, the nature of this interaction is a parallel conscious existence on consciousness that we experience. So this word experience is used very specifically and specially here. So this wave that you're seeing, on which this ball that is there, this ball on this wave, this is an experience that takes place in the mind. And our life is a series of such experiences. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Now, we had seen this interaction that we have with the external world and how it created this impression, this vritti on the mind, on the consciousness. Now, it should not be that difficult for us to extend this phenomenon, this, this concept to non-abstract things. If you feel love towards somebody, if you feel hate towards somebody, if you have got some kind of a attitude of devotion towards somebody, now they form their kind of vrittis. Now I have here depicted them, these vrittis, as having the same amplitude here, but that's not the case. These vrittis, they have higher and lower amplitude. They have a life cycle, so they stay for a while, and we can appreciate, we can understand the this kind of working. But the Vedic principles, now we need to be very careful, and we don't want to get dragged into this, but just to complete this topic, these impressions, they, some of them might go away, but some of them lay dormant and they never go away. And when the right stimuli comes, they again jump up. And when some of these vrittis, some of these impressions, if you were to take a somewhat sharp object and you start drawing a shape, a circle, let's say, on the bark of a tree, at first you make a very superficial figure on the bark, the wood, and then you keep at it. You do it a second time, third time, a fourth time, fifth time, you keep at it. And then after 1,000 times, now you might be talking to somebody and you're doing something else, but your hand, it keeps going round and round and round on that bark. And even before you know it, you have already etched out a significant portion of this wooden tree, and it has left a very distinct round mark on that. It is no longer superficial, it has dug deep. And that is also what happens here. If there are impressions, these are habits. So there are impressions that keep taking place again and again and again on the mind. They leave very strong impressions versus light impressions. And what one of the we have to be open-minded, and we don't have to accept this what I'm going to say next, and we shouldn't let this affect our reasoning that we are doing. But just to complete the thought process, that these impressions, they are thought to outlive a person's entire lifespan. So certain vrittis that we might experience, the thinking is some of them we might have gotten from our previous life. Again, we don't have to, this affects our thought process in no way, but just as a point of academic completion, these vrittis, they can outlive the body, is what the claim is. Doesn't matter to us. We are going to restrict ourselves just to the current life, maybe even the current moment. That itself is a very big thing to understand what is there. And this understanding of the mind is very fascinating. And like I said, you cannot stop marveling at the brilliance of Shankara, how he has thought of all this, how he has put all this together. It is mind-boggling how he could have thought of some of these things. But it's not him per se, it has been come from the other Vedas. We are over time now. But this, I'm going to continue on this slide next time. But these vrittis, they are not limited to just tangible things. They are intangible. They are any and all of our experiences. That is, all these is our life, is experiences. And these vrittis that are there, they begin to cloud our ability to sense this consciousness that is the underlying substratum of these vrittis. Okay, we are at the end of our session's time. So I'm going to conclude this session and we will continue next.